I called my daughter Sarah to find out when the wedding would be, and my son-in-law answered, "We got married last week. We only invited important people." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and confused in my own kitchen. Important people. After 3 years of paying their $800 monthly rent, buying their groceries, and covering every emergency that came their way, I apparently wasn't important enough to witness the most significant day of my only daughter's life. I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring at the family photos on my refrigerator where Sarah's bright smile looked back at me from every holiday gathering. The wedding dress we had picked out together just 2 months ago was still hanging in my closet upstairs, tags still attached, waiting for a day that had apparently already come and gone without me. $2,800 I had spent on that dress, thinking about how beautiful my only daughter would look walking down the aisle. The silence on the phone stretched like a canyon between us, until Jake cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thompson, are you still there?" he asked, and I could hear Sarah's voice in the background telling him to hang up. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They had planned this. They had deliberately excluded me from the most important day of my daughter's life. For weeks I had been calling caterers, looking at venues, and putting money aside for their wedding reception. I had already sent save-the-date cards to my sister Jennifer in Dallas and my elderly mother in Florida. The guest list was sitting on my dining room table, carefully handwritten with addresses I had spent hours collecting from family members who hadn't seen Sarah since she was little. All of that preparation, all of that excitement, all of that love, and they had thrown it away like yesterday's newspaper. But what Jake said next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my own daughter, and the betrayal was only just beginning. "We didn't want to make a big deal out of it," Jake continued, his voice carrying that dismissive tone he used whenever he wanted to shut down a conversation. I could picture him standing in their living room, the one I had furnished completely when they moved in together, probably wearing the expensive watch I had bought him for his birthday last year. Sarah finally took the phone from him, and her voice was different, colder than I had ever heard it before. "Mom, we just wanted something simple and private," she said, but I could hear the rehearsed quality in her words. Simple and private. Those words echoed in my mind as I remembered all the conversations we had shared about her dream wedding. She used to talk for hours about walking down the aisle, about having her grandmother's ring as her something old, about the first dance with her new husband while I watched proudly from the front row. We had spent countless Saturday afternoons looking at wedding magazines together, folding down pages of dresses and decorations she loved. All of those dreams, all of those shared moments, and she had decided they meant nothing. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in as I tried to process what my daughter was telling me. I had been supporting them financially for 3 years, ever since Jake lost his job at Henderson's Auto Repair, and Sarah was struggling to make ends meet on her salary from the dental office. Every month I transferred $800 to cover their rent, and that didn't include the groceries, the utility bills, or the countless emergencies that seemed to pop up whenever they wanted something new. I sank into the chair at my kitchen table, the same table where Sarah used to do her homework when she was in high school, where we used to plan her college applications and talk about her future. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in the same spot where I had written countless checks to support her adult life, and now she was telling me that her wedding, the most important milestone of that life, wasn't important enough to include me in. My hands shook as I tried to find the right words to respond. But the worst part wasn't just that they had excluded me from their wedding. The worst part was what I discovered when I looked at Sarah's social media later that night, and the photos I found there would reveal just how calculated their deception really was. That evening, I sat in my living room with my laptop, scrolling through Sarah's Instagram page with trembling fingers. What I found there felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Photo after photo of their simple and private wedding ceremony at Sunset Gardens, one of the most expensive venues in Phoenix. Sarah looked radiant in a white dress I had never seen before, one that must have cost at least $2,000. Jake was wearing a brand new tuxedo, and they were surrounded by at least 40 guests, all smiling and celebrating their special day. I recognized Jake's parents, his 3 brothers, and his sister Amanda, who had never even acknowledged my existence at family gatherings. There was Sarah's college roommate Emma, her coworkers from the dental office, and even some neighbors from their apartment complex. Everyone was there, except the one person who had been supporting their lives financially for 3 years. The one person who had sacrificed her own comfort to make sure they never went without anything they needed or wanted. The photo showed a full reception with a DJ, professional catering, and a 3-tier wedding cake that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. There were pictures of Sarah throwing her bouquet, of the couple's first dance, and of champagne toasts with crystal glasses that sparkled in the evening light. This wasn't a simple courthouse ceremony like they had tried to make me believe. This was a full wedding celebration that had been planned for months, and I had been deliberately excluded from every moment of it. As I scrolled through the comments, my heart broke even more. "So beautiful," wrote Emma. "Perfect wedding for the perfect couple," commented Jake's mother, Patricia. "Couldn't be happier for you both," added Sarah's supervisor from work. Dozens of congratulations from people who had been trusted with this secret while I, her own mother, had been left completely in the dark. The woman who had given birth to her, raised her alone after her father died, and continued supporting her adult life was apparently not worthy of witnessing her marriage. But what devastated me most was the caption Sarah had written under the main wedding photo, and those words would haunt me for weeks to come. "Finally married my best friend in the most perfect intimate ceremony," Sarah had written, "surrounded by the people who truly matter to us." The words, "people who truly matter," hit me like a physical blow. After everything I had done for her, after every sacrifice I had made to ensure her happiness, I apparently didn't matter enough to be included in the most important day of her life. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my living room, tears streaming down my face as the full weight of their betrayal settled over me. The next morning I woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy heart, but also with a strange sense of clarity. I walked to my kitchen table where I kept my checkbook and bank statements, and I started calculating exactly how much money I had given Sarah and Jake over the past 3 years. Rent payments of $800 per month for 36 months came to $28,800. Grocery money, utility payments, car repairs, medical bills, birthday and Christmas gifts, emergency loans that were never repaid. The total came to over $45,000. $45,000 of my retirement savings, money my late husband David had worked double shifts to save for our golden years together. Money I had been carefully managing since his death 5 years ago, stretching every dollar to make sure I could live comfortably in my later years. Instead, I had been pouring it into the lives of 2 people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM. The realization made me feel sick to my stomach, but it also sparked something else inside me that had been dormant for too long. I picked up my phone and called Sarah's number, my hands steadier than they had been the day before. When Jake answered again, his voice had that familiar irritated tone he used whenever I called during inconvenient times. But before I could speak, I heard Sarah in the background saying something that made my blood boil. "Tell her we're busy with thank you cards," she said, loud enough for me to hear. Thank you cards for a wedding I wasn't invited to, from gifts given by people who were considered worthy of attending their special day. Before I reveal what I said to them in that phone call, let me ask you something. What would you do if your own child treated you this way after years of financial support? Have you ever felt completely taken for granted by someone you love? Tell me in the comments how you would handle this situation. And if you're feeling as angry as I was in that moment, give this video a like. "Jake, put Sarah on the phone," I said with a firmness that surprised even me. There was a long pause, some muffled conversation in the background, and then Sarah's voice came through sounding annoyed rather than apologetic. "Mom, what's wrong now?" she asked, as if I was the problem, as if I was being unreasonable for wanting to discuss the fact that my only daughter had gotten married without telling me. The casual dismissiveness in her tone was like a slap across the face. "Sarah, I need you to explain something to me," I said, walking to my living room window and looking out at the street where David and I used to take evening walks together. "Yesterday you told me your wedding was simple and private, but I've seen the photos online. 40 people, professional catering, and a venue that costs thousands of dollars. That doesn't sound simple or private to me." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had been disconnected. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice had shifted into that defensive tone she had perfected as a teenager whenever she was caught in a lie. "Mom, you're being dramatic. It wasn't that big of a deal. We just wanted to keep it small and stress-free." But I could hear Jake coaching her in the background, telling her what to say, and that made my anger burn even hotter. Here was my 26-year-old daughter, still letting someone else speak for her, still hiding behind excuses and half-truths. Stress-free for who? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. It certainly wasn't stress-free for me to find out about my daughter's wedding from a casual phone call the week after it happened. It wasn't stress-free to realize that everyone in those photos knew about your wedding except the person who has been paying your bills for 3 years. Sarah's response was immediate and cutting, delivered with a coldness that I had never heard from her before. "Mom, that's exactly why we didn't invite you," she said, her words falling like stones into the silence between us. "Because you always make everything about money. You can't just be happy for us without bringing up what you've spent or what you've done for us." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, but it also revealed something about how my daughter truly saw me and our relationship. I stood in my living room, phone pressed to my ear, feeling like I was talking to a stranger who happened to sound like my daughter. "Sarah, I'm not making this about money," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm making this about the fact that you deliberately excluded me from the most important day of your life. I'm making this about the fact that you lied to me and made me feel like I don't matter to you at all." But even as I spoke the words, I could hear how they sounded to her, and I realized that maybe she was right about one thing. Maybe I had been using money as a way to stay connected to her life, as a way to feel needed and important in a relationship that had been shifting for years. Maybe every check I wrote, every bill I paid, every emergency I solved had been my way of trying to buy love from a daughter who was pulling away from me naturally as she built her own adult life. The thought was painful, but it was also illuminating in a way that made me question everything about our relationship. "You know what, Mom?" Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her argument. "Jake and I have been talking about this for months. We're tired of feeling guilty every time we spend money because we know you're going to remind us later about all the ways you've helped us. We're tired of feeling like we owe you something for every dollar you give us. We just wanted one day that was about us, not about your money or your expectations." Her words stung, because there was truth in them, but they also revealed how carefully she and Jake had planned this exclusion. They hadn't just decided to have a small wedding. They had specifically decided to have a wedding without me, and they had been discussing this decision for months while continuing to accept my financial support. The calculated nature of their deception was what hurt the most. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, pacing now from my living room to my kitchen and back again. "You and Jake spent months planning a wedding, invited 40 people, spent thousands of dollars on a venue and catering, but you couldn't find room for the woman who gave birth to you, the woman who has been supporting you financially for 3 years while you figured out your lives. And your explanation is that I make everything about money." The irony was so thick I could taste it. Sarah's silence told me everything I needed to know, but Jake's voice came through the phone clearly as he took over the conversation. "Mrs. Thompson, with all due respect, Sarah and I are adults. We don't need your permission to get married, and we don't need to justify our guest list to anyone." His arrogance was breathtaking, especially considering that I had been paying his car insurance for the past 8 months since he claimed he couldn't afford it on his mechanic's salary. "You're absolutely right, Jake," I replied, surprising him with my agreement. "You're both adults, and you're absolutely free to make your own decisions about your wedding, your guest list, and your lives. Just like I'm free to make decisions about my money and who I choose to support financially." The shift in my tone must have registered because I heard Sarah gasp in the background, and Jake's cocky confidence suddenly wavered. "Mom, what are you saying?" Sarah asked, taking the phone back from Jake. I could hear the first hint of panic creeping into her voice, and it occurred to me that maybe they hadn't thought through all the consequences of their decision to exclude me from their lives. Maybe they had assumed that my financial support was unconditional, that I would continue funding their lifestyle regardless of how they treated me. For 3 years, I had been the reliable safety net beneath their high-wire act of adult life. Every month, like clockwork, I transferred money to cover their rent, their utilities, their groceries, and their countless emergencies. But safety nets only work when there's mutual respect and appreciation, and I was finally realizing that I had been taken for granted for far too long. "What I'm saying, Sarah, is that if you and Jake are mature enough to plan a secret wedding and exclude your mother from your special day, then you're certainly mature enough to handle your own financial responsibilities," I said, walking to my kitchen counter where I kept my checkbook. "Starting next month, you won't need to worry about my money making you feel guilty anymore. You'll be completely free to live your lives without any strings attached." The silence on the phone was deafening. "Mom, you can't be serious." Sarah's voice cracked and I could hear her moving around. probably pacing in their apartment the same way I was pacing in my house. We have bills due next week. The rent is $800 and our car payment is due on Friday. We were counting on your help this month. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable, and it confirmed what I had suspected all along. They had never seen my support as generosity. They had seen it as an obligation. Jake grabbed the phone again, his voice now tight with barely controlled anger. Mrs. Thompson, you can't just cut us off without warning. We have a lease agreement, insurance payments, and other financial commitments based on your support. You can't just change the rules overnight because your feelings are hurt. His sense of entitlement was staggering, especially coming from someone who had just excluded me from his wedding while living off my financial contributions. Actually, Jake, I can change the rules, I said, opening my checkbook and looking at the carbon copies of all the checks I had written to support their lifestyle. Just like you changed the rules when you decided to get married without including me. Just like you changed the rules when you planned a reception for 40 people, but couldn't find space for one more chair. You wanted independence from my expectations, and now you have independence from my support as well. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know something from you in the comments. When someone shows you through their actions that you don't matter to them, how long should you keep supporting them financially? Have you ever had to cut off support for someone you love? Share your experience below, and if you think I'm doing the right thing, show me with a like on this video. Sarah was crying now. Real tears that I could hear through the phone, and for a moment my maternal instincts kicked in the way they always had when she was upset. But then I remembered the photos from their wedding, the joy on her face as she celebrated with everyone except me, and my resolve strengthened. Mom, please don't do this, she sobbed. I know we made a mistake with the wedding, but you can't punish us financially for one bad decision. We'll make it up to you, I promise. How will you make it up to me, Sarah? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. Will you have another wedding and invite me this time? Will you apologize for lying to me about having a simple ceremony when you actually had a full reception? Will you explain to your 40 wedding guests that your mother wasn't there because you decided she didn't matter enough to include? The questions hung in the air because we both knew there was no way to undo what had been done. Jake took the phone back and his voice had lost all of its earlier arrogance. Look, Mrs. Thompson, maybe we can work something out. Sarah and I could start paying you back gradually for some of the money you've given us over the years. We could set up a payment plan or something. The offer was pathetic in its transparency. They hadn't offered to pay me back during 3 years of financial support. But now that the money was stopping, suddenly, they were willing to discuss repayment. Jake, I don't want you to pay me back, I said, surprising him again. The money I gave you over the past 3 years was freely given because I love my daughter and wanted to help her build a stable adult life. I don't regret giving it, and I don't want it back. What I want is for you both to understand that actions have consequences, and the consequence of excluding me from your lives is that you no longer get to depend on my financial support. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah alternating between tears and anger, and Jake oscillating between threats and promises. But I had made my decision, and for the first time in 3 years, I was putting my own emotional well-being ahead of their financial needs. When I finally hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the relief of standing up for myself. That night, I called my sister Jennifer in Dallas to tell her what had happened. Jennifer had always been more skeptical of Sarah and Jake's relationship than I was, and she had questioned whether my financial support was helping or enabling them. Linda, I'm proud of you, she said after I finished explaining the situation. You've been letting them take advantage of your generosity for years, and it was only a matter of time before they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Jennifer reminded me of conversations we had shared over the past 3 years, times when I had called her stressed about another financial emergency Sarah and Jake were facing, another crisis that required my immediate intervention. Remember last Christmas when Jake's transmission broke and you had to give them an extra $1,000? She asked. Or when Sarah needed dental work and you paid for it even though she works at a dental office with insurance. They've been creating emergencies knowing you would solve them. The pattern was clear once Jennifer pointed it out. Every few months there was a crisis that required immediate financial intervention. The washing machine broke. The air conditioning died. Medical bills appeared unexpectedly. Car repairs became urgent. I had been so focused on being a helpful mother that I hadn't recognized how these emergencies always seemed to coincide with times when they wanted something new, or when their own spending had gotten out of control. The wedding thing is just the final proof that they see you as a bank, not as a person, Jennifer continued. They planned an expensive celebration and invited everyone who mattered to them emotionally, but they didn't invite the person who mattered to them financially. That tells you everything you need to know about how they really see your relationship. Her words were harsh but accurate, and they helped me understand that my decision to cut off support wasn't about punishment. It was about self-respect. Over the next few days, my phone rang constantly with calls from Sarah and Jake, but I didn't answer. They left voicemails that started apologetic and gradually became more demanding. Text messages arrived at all hours, some pleading for understanding and others threatening to cut off contact completely if I didn't reconsider my decision. A week after our phone confrontation, Sarah showed up at my front door unannounced, looking tired and stressed in a way I hadn't seen since her college finals. She was carrying a manila envelope and had that determined expression she used to get as a child when she was preparing to negotiate for something she wanted. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "Jake and I have been thinking about everything, and we have a proposal for you." She sat down on my couch and opened the envelope, pulling out several printed pages that looked like they had been prepared by someone with legal knowledge. "We've drawn up an agreement," she said, handing me the papers with a business-like efficiency that made me feel like I was meeting with a financial advisor rather than my daughter. "We'll pay you back $200 per month for the money you've given us, and in exchange, you'll resume your monthly support until we get back on our feet financially." I looked at the papers, which were titled Family Financial Support Agreement, and contained detailed terms about repayment schedules, interest rates, and conditions for continued support. The document was 3 pages long and had been notarized, which meant they had gone to significant trouble and expense to have this prepared. "Sarah, who helped you write this?" I asked, because the legal language was far beyond anything she could have drafted herself. "Jake's brother Mark is a paralegal," she admitted, shifting uncomfortably on the couch. "He said that having everything in writing would be better for both of us, more professional and clear about expectations." The fact that they had involved Jake's family in creating a legal document to govern our relationship was both heartbreaking and illuminating. They had turned my maternal support into a business transaction, complete with contracts and legal oversight. As I read through the terms of their proposed agreement, I realized that they still didn't understand what had really been damaged by their wedding decision. They thought this was about money, about repayment schedules and formal agreements. They didn't realize that this was about trust, respect, and the fundamental question of whether they saw me as a person worth including in their lives, or just as a resource to be managed and manipulated. "Sarah, let me ask you something," I said, setting the legal documents aside and looking directly at my daughter. "In this entire 3-page agreement, I don't see anything about our relationship. I don't see any acknowledgement of how your wedding decision made me feel, or any commitment to including me in your future as something other than a financial supporter. This reads like a business contract between strangers, not an agreement between a mother and daughter." Sarah's face flushed red, and she looked down at her hands before responding. "Mom, we thought you'd appreciate having everything clearly spelled out. No more misunderstandings about expectations or obligations." But her voice lacked conviction, and I could tell that even she recognized how cold and transactional their proposal sounded. This wasn't about clarity or professionalism. This was about maintaining financial support while minimizing emotional connection. "Do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to go to that concert in Tucson with your friends?" I asked, thinking back to a much simpler time in our relationship. "I said no because I was worried about your safety, and you were furious with me for weeks. But eventually you understood that my decision came from love, from wanting to protect you. That's what a real relationship looks like, Sarah. Sometimes we disappoint each other, but we work through it because we care about each other as people, not as resources." Sarah finally looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to help me bake cookies for her school fundraisers, who used to tell me everything about her day over dinner each night. "I miss that little girl," I said softly. "I miss having a daughter who wanted to share her life with me, not just my bank account." "When did that change, Sarah? When did I become someone you only call when you need money?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, seeming to struggle with emotions she hadn't expected to feel. For the first time since this whole situation began, I saw uncertainty in her eyes instead of the calculating confidence she had shown when trying to manipulate me back into financial support. "Mom, it's not like that," Sarah said finally, but her voice was shaky and uncertain. "I do want you in my life. It's just that Jake thinks—" She stopped herself, realizing what she had just revealed. The truth was out now. This wasn't really about Sarah's feelings or our relationship. This was about Jake's influence over her decisions, Jake's resentment of my involvement in their lives, and Jake's desire to have financial support without emotional obligations attached. "Sarah, finish that sentence," I said firmly. "Jake thinks what?" The silence stretched between us as she struggled with whether to be honest about her husband's role in these decisions. I could see the internal conflict playing out on her face, the tension between loyalty to her new marriage and honesty with her mother. Finally, she took a deep breath and opened up in a way she hadn't in years. "Jake thinks you're too controlling," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He says you use money to manipulate situations and make everything about yourself. He thinks the only reason you were upset about the wedding was because you couldn't be the center of attention. He said that if we invited you, you'd find ways to make the whole day about your feelings instead of about us as a couple." The accusations hit me like physical blows, especially because I could hear Jake's voice in every word. This wasn't Sarah speaking from her own experience. This was Sarah repeating her husband's interpretation of my behavior, his explanation for why I didn't deserve to be included in their wedding celebration. "And what do you think, Sarah?" I asked. "Do you agree with Jake's assessment of your mother?" Sarah looked trapped, caught between conflicting loyalties, and I realized that this was probably the first time since their marriage that she had been forced to choose between supporting her husband's narrative and defending our relationship. I think sometimes you do try to help in ways that feel overwhelming," she said carefully. "But I also think Jake doesn't understand how much you've sacrificed for us, how much you've given up to make sure we're okay. Sarah, I want you to think about something," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "For 3 years, every time you've called me, it's been about money. Car repairs, medical bills, rent emergencies, things you wanted to buy but couldn't afford. When was the last time you called just to talk? Just to see how I was doing, just to share something good that happened in your life?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again as she realized she couldn't remember. "I can tell you when," I continued. "It was before you moved in with Jake. The last conversation we had that wasn't about money was 3.5 years ago when you called to tell me about a promotion at work. Since then, every phone call, every visit, every text message has been connected to something you needed financially. Even your wedding announcement came in the context of asking about wedding planning expenses." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as the pattern became clear to her, perhaps for the first time. "I didn't realize," she whispered, and I could see that she was genuinely surprised by this revelation. In her mind, she had been maintaining a normal mother-daughter relationship, but the financial component had gradually overwhelmed everything else until it became the only connection we shared. "Your husband is right about one thing," I said gently. "I have been using money to stay connected to your life, but what he doesn't understand is that I did that because it was the only way you seemed to want me involved anymore. The only time you reached out to me was when you needed financial help, so I started offering financial help more frequently because I missed talking to my daughter." I paused, gathering my thoughts before continuing with the most important point. "But Jake is wrong about why I was hurt by your wedding decision. I wasn't upset because I wanted to be the center of attention. I was hurt because after 3 years of being your financial lifeline, I wasn't considered important enough to witness the most significant moment of your adult life. That's not about control or manipulation, Sarah. That's about feeling discarded by someone I love." Sarah was crying openly now, not the manipulative tears she had used during our phone conversation, but genuine sobs that seemed to come from a place of real understanding. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said through her tears. "I didn't see it that way. I didn't realize how much we had hurt you, how excluded you must have felt. Jake kept saying it would be better this way, that you'd understand, that we could celebrate with you later privately. But you never planned a private celebration with me, did you?" I asked gently. "You never made any plans to include me in your marriage in any way. The wedding was over, the photos were posted, the thank you cards were written, and I was still completely outside of it all." Sarah shook her head, acknowledging the truth of what I was saying. There had been no plan to include me because including me had never been a priority. "Jake said you'd get over it. she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He said you'd be mad for a while, but that eventually you'd want to be part of our lives again and things would go back to normal. He said family always forgives each other in the end. The casualness of their assumption that my forgiveness was guaranteed made my heart ache, but it also revealed how little they had considered the possibility of real consequences for their actions. Sarah, forgiveness and trust are two different things, I explained. I can forgive you for excluding me from your wedding because I understand that you were trying to please your husband and avoid conflict. But trust has to be rebuilt slowly, through actions, not through legal agreements or promises. And right now, I don't trust that you see me as anything more than a source of financial support. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden David and I had planted together years ago. When your father was dying, he made me promise that I would take care of myself, that I wouldn't spend all our savings trying to take care of everyone else at the expense of my own well-being. For the past 3 years, I've been breaking that promise. I've been so focused on taking care of you and Jake that I forgot to take care of myself. So what happens now? Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. Where do we go from here? It was the first question she had asked that focused on our relationship rather than on financial arrangements, and I appreciated the shift in her priorities. I turned back to face her, seeing my little girl's face overlaid with the features of the woman she had become, and I felt a mixture of love and sadness that was almost overwhelming. Now you and Jake learn to live as independent adults without my financial support, I said clearly. You figure out how to pay your own bills, handle your own emergencies, and make your own way in the world. And maybe, over time, we rebuild a relationship that's based on something other than money. Maybe we learn to enjoy each other's company without any financial transactions involved. Sarah nodded slowly, seeming to understand that this wasn't just about punishment or hurt feelings. This was about changing the fundamental dynamic of our relationship, about finding a way to connect as mother and daughter, rather than as provider and recipient. Will you answer if I call you? She asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice that she might have damaged our relationship beyond repair. I'll answer if you call to talk, if you call to share your life, if you call because you miss me or want my advice about something other than money, I said. But I won't answer calls about financial emergencies or requests for money. Those days are over, Sarah. You're a married woman now, and it's time for you and your husband to handle your own responsibilities. She nodded again, accepting the terms even though I could see they scared her. Before she left, Sarah hugged me for the first time in months. A real hug that lasted longer than the quick embraces we had shared at recent holidays. I love you, Mom, she whispered, and for the first time in years those words didn't come with a request attached. I love you too, baby girl, I whispered back, hoping that someday we might find our way back to the close relationship we had once shared. 6 months have passed since that conversation with Sarah, and our relationship has slowly begun to change in ways I never expected. The first few weeks were difficult. Sarah called several times in panic about bills and emergencies, but I held firm to my boundaries. Jake was furious and accused me of abandoning my family, but Sarah gradually stopped letting him speak for her in our conversations. She started handling her own financial discussions with me, even when the answer was no. The turning point came when Sarah called me on a Thursday evening just to tell me about a funny patient she had treated at the dental office. We talked for an hour about work stories, memories from her childhood, and her thoughts about the future. There was no mention of money, no crisis that needed solving, no underlying agenda. It was just a mother and daughter enjoying each other's company, and it reminded me of why I had fallen in love with parenthood in the first place. Sarah and Jake have struggled financially, but they've also grown stronger as a couple by learning to solve problems together instead of relying on external support. They moved to a smaller apartment. Jake picked up weekend shifts at a different auto shop, and Sarah started doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses. They've discovered that they're more capable than they realized when they're forced to rely on themselves instead of on my bank account. Last month, Sarah invited me to dinner at their new apartment, and for the first time in years, I felt like a welcome guest rather than an obligated supporter. We cooked together, laughed about old times, and talked about their plans for the future. Jake was polite and respectful, perhaps finally understanding that I'm not his enemy but rather his wife's mother, who deserves basic courtesy and consideration. The most surprising development has been Sarah's growing independence from Jake's influence. She started making her own decisions about our relationship, standing up to him when he criticizes me, and rebuilding the mother-daughter bond that had been buried under years of financial dependence. She still makes mistakes, and we still have difficult conversations, but now those conversations are based on honesty rather than manipulation. Looking back on this experience, I realized that cutting off financial support was the best decision I could have made for both Sarah and myself. It forced her to grow up in ways that my continued enabling never would have accomplished, and it allowed me to rediscover my own worth as a person rather than just as a provider. The woman who had been excluded from her daughter's wedding has slowly been replaced by a mother who is valued for her wisdom, her company, and her love, rather than just her money. My relationship with Sarah will never be exactly what it was before, but it's becoming something better. A connection between two adults who choose to be in each other's lives because they genuinely enjoy each other's company. The little girl who used to tell me everything has grown into a woman who shares her thoughts and feelings because she wants to, not because she needs something from me. The most important lesson I've learned is that love cannot be purchased, and relationships built on financial dependency are ultimately hollow and unsatisfying for everyone involved. Real love requires mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's well-being, and the courage to set boundaries when those boundaries are necessary for emotional health. To anyone watching who has found themselves in a similar situation, I want you to know that it's never too late to reclaim your self-respect and demand to be treated as a person, rather than as a resource. It's scary to set boundaries with people you love, but sometimes those boundaries are the only thing that can save the relationship from complete destruction. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between financial generosity and emotional self-respect? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family, relationships, and the courage to stand up for yourself when it matters most.